Chapter 16 of The Alley Cat's Kitten. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Alley Cat's Kitten by Carolyn Fuller. Christmas Eve. It was Christmas Eve again, and Mrs. Wood sat alone with Weegems before the fire downstairs. Franklin had stayed up to help fill the stockings, but now he too was gone, and the ticking of the clock sounded very loud. It was the first Christmas Eve that she had ever spent by herself, and her thoughts went back to the time when the children's father had been with her, and the last few hours of this day were the most beautiful in all the year. When grandmother was there, she kept one from thinking too much, although she too may have remembered other Christmases spent with him who had been the children's father and her little boy. But grandmother was not here tonight, and there was nothing to keep one from thinking. Nothing at all. Down on the rug, Weegems was busily washing Octavius, the beautiful kitten who was to go as a Christmas present with Eunice's love to Marian Armstrong. Weegems did not know why he was named Octavius, or that it was her own grandparent on whom she had called in New York and at whom she had spit. "Weegems," called Mrs. Wood, softly, "dear little kitty, come and speak to me." Weegems rose with an answering purr, and, leaving Octavius asleep in a ring of his own baby tail, leaped upon her lap. It seemed to Mrs. Wood that Weegems' attitude towards the children had changed since she grew older, and her kittens came. At first she had thought Eunice was her mother, but now she realized that Eunice was only a kitten after all, and that Mrs. Wood was nearer her own age. They sat watching the fire together until the coals whitened, and the clock slowly struck 12. Then Mrs. Wood gave a few last touches to the stockings hung in the shadows, and went upstairs. But as she entered her room, there was the sound of soft little paws beside her, and a comforting purr-ow in the darkness, for Weegems had left her kitten and gone with the companion who needed her most. She never followed me like this before, Mrs. Wood thought. Is it possible that she knew I was lonely tonight? That she felt a difference? Weegems did not explain what she thought, but when Mrs. Wood was in bed, curled down beside her with a drowsy purr most soothing to hear. "I'm glad she's here," thought Eunice's mother. "I don't feel much like sleep tonight, and it's nice to have somebody." "Purr," said Weegems, softly. "Purr." It was just 6 years ago tonight, Mrs. Wood began thinking. Purr. Why, how loud that purr was growing, ever so much more like an alarm clock than a purr, and it ended with a sharp brr-ting. Mrs. Wood sat up and rubbed her eyes. Yes, it was the alarm clock that she had set last night. Weegems was no longer there, and she heard a joyous shout from Kenneth's room. "Why, I've been asleep," she said with a laugh. The Alley Cat's Kitten had done her work, for it was 6 o'clock, and Christmas morning. End of chapter 16. End of The Alley Cat's Kitten by Carolyn Fuller.